Okay, well, welcome everyone. Looks like people are joining the webinar. I wanted to go ahead and get started to respect everybody who's here right on time. So just so you know, we have the Q&A set up, and Alicia will be monitoring that while we're going through. So if you have any questions, then please definitely ask those in the Q&A section. And then we will, so what we're going to do today, I invited kind of a wider audience, so we're going to go through the information that I've gone through on the last couple webinars, just to kind of bring everybody up to speed. We're going to talk about what is new, and then we will be talking about a little bit of things that we're not quite sure of yet. So here we go. Oops. So the first thing we want to talk about is the Families First Corona Response Act. And this is the act that actually went into place last week. They did redefine a couple things. The new date that this goes into effect is April 1st. They originally said that it was an April 2nd start date, but they shifted that, they pushed that back to April 1st. It will end December 31st, and it covers all employers with fewer than 500 employees. The Act creates two different sections. It has the Federal Emergency Paid Sick Leave, or what we refer to as EPSL, and the expansion of the Family Medical Leave Act. Employers will pay for the benefits, will pay for the sick leave, and they'll be reimbursed 100% through tax credits. And that's what we found out this week, is that is going to be paid through payroll tax reduction. So really quickly to go through the two different parts of this. The paid sick leave, the emergency paid sick leave, gives 10 days of sick leave to employees for any of the reasons listed. Generally, it's if they're subject to a quarantine or an isolation as a result of COVID-19. If the employee is advised to self-quarantine due to COVID-19, if the employee experiences symptoms from COVID-19, or if the employee is caring for an individual who is under quarantine or isolation orders, or caring for a child whose school has been closed. And then the final one is the catch-all: if the Secretary of Health or Human Services, or the Secretary of Treasury, or the Secretary of Labor finds another reason in the future that we need to include in this. The expanded FMLA only covers people if they are unable to work or telework due to the need to care for a child whose school has been closed or whose child care provider is unavailable. So that it only expands the eligibility for that one component. In terms of paying during the leave, for the first couple line items for the EPSL, the employer must pay the regular rate to the employee. So these are all the things that are specifically affecting the employee. Either the employee is sick or the employee has been self-quarantined. If the employee is taking care of somebody else, then they would get paid 2/3 of their regular rate of pay. Both of those do have daily maximums. For the first three reasons, it's a maximum of $511 per day, and for the last three reasons, it's $200 per day. EPSL is in addition to any existing paid leave policies, and it would be used before any of the company's paid leave, so vacation or PTO. Under the expanded Family Medical Leave Act, the employee will get the first 2 weeks of leave unpaid. And that's because that time is covered under EPSL. The employer must provide paid leave for the 10 weeks thereafter, and the employee may use accrued sick leave or vacation time during the initial 2 weeks, but after that it's paid at the 2/3 rate. So some updates about this is that the paid sick leave is for 80 hours of paid sick leave, and it was expanded to include the child care when children's schools are closed or child care providers are unavailable. It has complete coverage for payment for the employers. So the employer will pay for it and pay for all the costs, and then we'll get reimbursed by the government for all of those costs. That includes health insurance costs. There's no payroll tax liability for these payments to the employees, and this also covers self-employed individuals. The way that the government's going to be reimbursing this to employers is through reduction of payroll tax. So so it's going to be a one-for-one offset, a dollar-for-dollar offset. When you're submitting your payroll, you want to make sure that you're looking to your payroll company for some guidance on how to track this. Probably the easiest starting point as the payroll systems start to try and figure out how they're going to track this is to set up a pay code within your system if you have the capability to do that, so you can track time off for the EPSL or for the extended FMLA specifically in your payroll system. We have an example that was provided by the IRS. If an employer pays $100,000 in paid sick leave under the Act and the employer's total tax liability for the quarter is $150,000, then the employer would only need to pay $50,000 or deposit $50,000. If the employer pays $100,000 in the paid sick leave and the tax liability is only $50,000, then they would actually get a refund of $50,000 from the IRS. The IRS is trying to do that as quickly as possible, but they haven't set any guidance on how that will be, how you will submit the request for that. There is a small business protection or exemption, and this is only for the FMLA. This does not apply to the EPSL. That employers with fewer than 50 employees are eligible for an exemption from the requirements to provide leave to care for a child whose school is closed or childcare is unavailable in cases where the viability of the business is threatened. So if that's something that's of concern, then you might be able to get an exemption for that. And they are not strictly enforcing this. There's a 30-day non-enforcement period for good faith, as all employers and all businesses try to get up to speed with what the rules are. Of course, our friends in San Francisco and Emeryville had to include some special requirements. This is not for the EPSL. This is for the San Francisco and Emeryville sick leave ordinances. They have added additional reasons that employees can use sick leave, and these mirror what's in the EPSL, except to specifically outline the vulnerable populations of people that are 60 years or older, and the temporary cessation of operations in response to public health or official recommendations. So basically this allows, if companies are closed, it allows them that they can use sick leave to cover that time. There's a couple other San Francisco specific updates, including the Healthcare Security Ordinance, the HCSO, and the Fair Chance Ordinance, FCO, has annual reporting that's usually required. They are canceling that requirement for 2019, so you don't need to submit that. There's also the Workers and Families First program that offers financial assistance to businesses to provide additional paid sick leave. So if this extends on, the city will be able to offer funds to pay for sick leave beyond the initial time that employees are requesting. You also want to, excuse me, you also want to look at your 401k. There could be opportunities for hardship loans to be taken out. If your company has a 401k and the 401k has a hardship loan policy plan as part of the plan, they may be able to take it out to cover loss of income incurred due to a disaster declared under FEMA. And that is the case in most of the states right now. The IRS is also looking at expanding the scope of that to include hardship withdrawals that are covering employees' family members as well. One other thing we wanted to make sure people are updating is reviewing all of the benefits that they have in place. So if you are keeping if people are still working, but they're working remotely, make sure that you are updating things like commuter benefits and dependent care benefits. These are things that can be changed throughout the year. So you want to ensure that people are canceling these benefits if they're not using them, so they're not accruing money that they won't be able to get back, because there's a limit of how much can be used in the year. The DOL model notice is also out. So we want to make sure that you get this posted and sent out to the employees. We'll follow up the program today with an email with the video, as well as a link to download the DOL notice. If you do have all of your employees working remotely, you want to make sure that you're emailing this out to them so they have access to this, or that you're posting it somewhere on an intranet that they have access to. The coronavirus stimulus bill has literally just passed. I scanned through a number of different sites and a number of different things to see what I could find that was specific to employment. And what I could find, and this is not confirmed yet, and so next week probably I'll have some more information that we can send out on specifics on this. But the things that they were looking for the plan to do was to expand unemployment benefits, to extend not only the length of how long people can be on unemployment, but also to increase the amount that people are being offered. There was an option in there to refund employers for retaining payroll, so getting a tax credit for keeping idle workers on payroll, and that could be up to $5,000 per worker. There's also part of it was to defer Social Security tax up to 6.2%. I could defer that tax up to 6.2% for employers and self-employed. This again it's a deferral, so it would have to be paid in the future, but that could be some cost savings right now. And then there were some emergency grants might be available to be used to provide and pay for the employee's sick leave, to maintain payroll, and to meet other business expenses. So these are things, like I said, that I read as I was scanning through some of the different components of the stimulus bill. Once we have more definitive terms of how to access this information and the specifics on it, we'll make sure that we get this out to everybody. So I wanted to shift from what the new rules are, and just some reminders about people who are managing people through this transition, however you're deciding to manage that. So there's managing remote workers. We want to remember that when you're managing remote workers, if you have non-exempt employees, that you're making sure that they are applying the same wage and hour rules. people are still completing timesheets, they're getting their meal and rest periods. However you would have managed them in the office is still being managed. You also want to make sure that you take into consideration reimbursement of supplies. Under the California Labor Code, employers are responsible for expenses incurred by employees when completing duties at the direction of the employer. So if you are now telling the employee that they have to work from home, you may be responsible for costs like internet and phone service and different things. So you just want to make sure that you're addressing that and keeping that in compliance. You want to ensure protection of confidential information, as things are now flying over the internet. If you weren't already set up to protect things like having a VPN in place or having some sort of online security setup, make sure that you're talking to somebody, whether it's your IT consultant or your internal IT, to make sure that those things are set up. Remember that employees who are working from home are still covered under workers' compensation. So specifically, this is around making sure that they're sitting in an appropriate desk, that they're working at a space. They're not lying on their bed and doing work that could potentially end up creating a workers' comp injury with ergonomic issues. You also want to make sure that you're creating a temporary work from home policy, so that people know what's expected. When are they supposed to be at work? What are their duties while they're working remotely? When do you want to be able to contact them? And make sure that they understand that this is not a right and that you reserve the right to revoke this, especially if it's something where once all of the stay-at-home orders are lifted, that you're expecting people to come back into the office. If you decide to put people on furloughs, a furlough is if you're putting somebody on a temporary unpaid leave. And the difference between a furlough and a layoff is actually severing the employment relationship, where a furlough is maintaining that employment relationship. It allows you to maintain their benefits for a period of time if you want to. You can, but you want to make sure all of this is defined. So you want to, if you offer them a furlough, you want to tell them how long you anticipate the furlough to be. So in this case, right now we're looking at an April 7th date, but there's also talk with the government that the stay-at-home orders may extend past that. So you want to make sure that that you're communicating with your employees if that date is changing, and you're doing that ahead of time as soon as you know what those changes are. If you decide to let people use vacation time, you want to make sure that that's outlined. During this time with the furloughs, you may be wanting to conserve as much cash as possible, and so you might not necessarily want to pay out vacation time. So you want to make sure that you're defining that and that's clear to the employees at that time. And then you want to decide how long you're going to cover your benefits, and if you're going to cover the employee's portion of the benefits or if they're going to need to pay that back. So if you're, what we're recommending to our clients is that they cover it say that they're going to cover it at least through the end of April, and then make a decision after that, in April, if they're going to extend that further as things progress. And then the worst case scenario is if you do decide to actually lay employees off. So this is when you're actually severing the employment relationship. It's important to understand all the legal risks and assess all of those. This is an involuntary termination. So you want to make sure that you're paying everything out when you make this decision and you give them their notice. So anything that would have to be paid on their last day, such as final pay, paid time off or vacation time, all of that needs to be paid on their final day. You want to make sure you have a documentation of how you're choosing to lay people off. So if you're not laying off your entire workforce, you want to make sure you're not making choices based on a discriminatory reason. You need to be able to back up that the people that you're choosing to keep are based on business purposes or seniority or however that decision is being made, but that you can prove that it's not based on a protected characteristic. You might want to look at adverse impact statistics. Are you because of the way you're choosing to lay people off, are you singling out a specific protected characteristic or a protected group of people, and it's impacting that out of whack with the rest of the people that are still being kept on. And finally, you want to make sure that when you're doing this, that you're communicating this with compassion. This is a hard time for everybody. All of the companies and the employees and everybody are very stressed out during this time. You want to make sure that they understand that you want the best for everybody. Whether they're going on furlough or going on layoff, they are eligible for unemployment. If they are sick if they do show signs of COVID-19, they could be eligible for state disability insurance, which actually would pay them more than unemployment. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And so you just want to make sure that when you're communicating this to employees, that you're trying to be as helpful and as informative as possible, because they are under a lot of stress during this time as much as we are. So before we move into Q&A, I wanted to just let you know that next week I'll be partnering with Laura Renner of Freedom Makers and actually digging in deeper to managing a remote workforce and how to create not only the expectations and the management and the policies around the workforce, but also setting up systems and communication tools and best practices for that. So if you would like to register for that, I'll be sending out some more information, but you can also go to go.eoshr.com/remote-strong and sign up for that webinar for next week. And finally, in the words of sweet John Lennon, everything will be okay in the end, and if it's not okay, then it's not the end. But at this point, I want you to know if you have specific questions and you want to talk to us one-on-one, we are always here to help. You can email us at hr@eoshr.com, or if you have any questions specifically you'd like us to answer online right now, please go ahead and submit those in the Q&A. Alicia, do we have any questions?
We don't have any questions just yet. One thing that I know that has come up for employers is the subject surrounding, people being nervous or scared to go into work. So, they're feeling they can still work, the facilities are still open, but what if they're, scared to go into work and they don't feel comfortable and they decide to stay home? Are there any provisions that cover those employees?
There aren't any provisions specifically, but if they can show that there is a reason, it might be covered under the shelter, or not the shelter in place, but the under the act for sorry, my brain is just not, sorry, I've been looking at this stuff all day, under the quarantine or isolation order. So if they talk to their doctor and the doctor has any kind of health concerns, there might be that component. But if there is no specific reason, then it probably would not be covered.
Gotcha. Another question that has come in is if we have planned to hire someone with a start date of 4/7, this is in Illinois, if our shelter in place extends beyond that, can we delay hiring?
Yes, we actually have had a couple of our clients either delay hiring or cancel hiring because of this and because of the shelter in place. So you just want to make sure, again, you're communicating with the employee, letting them know that there is that because of the situation that you're going to postpone the hiring date and give them a soft date and let them know that you'll check back in closer to that new date.
Another question that came in is how will the feds get the $600 in additional unemployment insurance to employees?
That's a good question. Um, that's part of the stimulus package of the stimulus act, and since that literally was signed a couple like an hour ago, I don't know all the details yet. My guess, and this is just a guess, is that it would still come through EDD, and then EDD would get additional funds from that. But we will know more as this unravels this weekend.
Next, what is the process for laying off employees? Is it initiated by the employer or the employee? What procedures or documentation do the employers follow? Can an employee file an unemployment claim if they have a reduction in hours but still employed part-time? So I guess we can start with the first part of that as far as
Yeah, so a layoff is an employer initiated involuntary termination. So for the most part, it's treated like any involuntary termination where you're letting them know what their last date is, you have to have their final pay available to them, and you would have to pay out any vacation or PTO that they have accrued. What was the rest of the question?
the second part, the second part of that question, what procedures or documentation does the employer need to follow?
So there is the main thing that you want to have is the change of work status or change in relationship form that basically outlines why they were let go, that it was a layoff, and what their final payout was. You want to make sure that they receive the for your benefits pamphlet from the EDD, which explains how they can apply for unemployment. And if you are going to give them a severance payment, I'd strongly encourage that you give them a severance payment, that in order for them to receive a severance payment, that you have a separation agreement in place. And that separation agreement just basically protects the company from the employee coming back and suing them for wrongful termination. But that would only be required, and you can only have them sign that if you're giving them a severance. And a severance could be anything from 1 week of pay to a month of pay to, I mean, it really depends on who the employee is, how long they've been with the company, and what the business is capable of paying.
Okay, and can an employee file for an unemployment claim if they have a reduction in hours but still employed part-time? Sarah, I'll give you a little break. So yes, the employee can file for an unemployment claim. The EDD will ultimately let them know if they are eligible for any type of unemployment compensation based on the reduction in hours and the calculations that they do. But they are allowed to file an unemployment claim in that case. Next question we have. We have 2 employees with kids in closed schools. Company is shut down. What is the best way to help these employees?
These employees will, effective April, well, okay, two parts to that. One is if the employees are still actively employed, then as of April 1st, they will be eligible for the paid leave, the emergency paid sick leave under for the for they'll be eligible for 2/3 of their compensation under emergency paid sick leave. And then they can, if it goes beyond the 2 weeks, they would be eligible for the FMLA leave, and they would still receive the 2/3 of their pay. And that would be that the cost of that would be reimbursed by under payroll taxes. If they are currently furloughed or laid off, then they can apply for unemployment during that time.
Next question. Should we require proof of kids being out of school or testing positive for COVID-19?
I think that I think that under FFCRA you can ask for some proof. You definitely can ask for proof of kids being out of school, but that's pretty easy. I mean, usually it's by school district. So it should be pretty easy to find out if the kids are actually out of school. And then testing positive for COVID, you just want to make sure, you just want to be really careful because this is HIPAA information. So you just want to protect that information as much as possible.
Right. And you are correct. Some of the guidance on that is that employees should be reasonable in honoring those requests from their employer to provide proof of this information.
Yep.
Next we have, do you know if there is a link yet for the exemption of the FFCRA for employers with less than 50 employees? So actually that was something that I just looked into. They do not have guidance as of yet on that. They said that the guidance is still forthcoming as far as what the outlining, for what reasons you would be exempt as an employer.
Okay.
Are there any requirements or responsibilities of employers to provide additional safety equipment, hand sanitizer, gloves, not normally provided? How does an employer communicate the shortage of supplies in an understanding manner to employees?
There would not be, I mean, if it's something where, that's a really good question. Alicia, do you have any insight on that, or?
Yes. So I know earlier on when they were talking about requirements of the employer, it would be reasonable requirements of the employer to provide PPE for their employees. Um, and if there is a shortage of supplies, just explaining to the employees, we're working as hard as we can to get XYZ supplies, and due to this, we're putting in orders, and we're expecting to have it by this day, or we're still in anticipation of getting those supplies if there are indeed some delays with that. But there are reasonable requirements for employers to provide PPE and to ensure a safe and sanitized environment.
Thanks. All right. Any other questions out there?
Let's see. So far, that's all we have for now. I don't see any more coming in on the Q&A or the chat.
Okay. Well, we will leave it there then for today. Thank you for joining us. We will probably have another session next week as we find out more information. We want to keep you guys up to date on what's going on, and we'll be sending out a copy of this webinar to everybody who participated, and it will include links to the slides as well as to the DOL poster. So make sure that you get that out to your employees. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.